The doctor stared at the test results, then back at Sandra Okafor. "Mrs. Okafor," he said carefully, "what is your blood group?" "O positive," Sandra replied. "And your husband?" "O positive too. Why?" The doctor removed his glasses. "Your son's blood group is A positive." Sandra frowned slightly. "And what does that mean?" The doctor hesitated. "Two parents who are both O positive cannot biologically produce a child with A positive blood." Silence filled the hospital room. "Genetically," he said, "it's impossible." Sandra didn't scream. She didn't cry. Across the room, Daniel slept on the hospital bed, feverish and small under a blanket. 7 years old, the boy she had raised since birth. Sandra looked at him, and that strange feeling she had buried for years crept back into her chest. That quiet distance she had never been able to explain. She thanked the doctor, took Daniel home, and said nothing. But that night, Sandra Okafor made a decision. She would find the truth, alone. 3 days later, while Daniel was at school, Sandra went into his room. She pulled 4 strands of hair from his hairbrush, sealed them in a small evidence bag, and drove 2 cities away to a private genetics lab. She paid cash, used a fake surname, and waited. 72 hours later, the results arrived. Sandra opened the envelope in her car. DNA analysis result. Probability of maternity, 0.000%. Conclusion: the tested subject is not the biological child of the female donor. For 30 seconds, Sandra screamed into the steering wheel, then she wiped her face, started the car, and drove home to make dinner. Because one thing had become terrifyingly clear: whoever did this was still in her life. So Sandra hired a private investigator. 2 weeks later, the investigator came back with a file and a name: Claire Mensah, Richard's childhood sweetheart. According to everyone who knew them, they had broken up years ago. Except they hadn't, because the investigator had photographs, Richard and Claire, hotels, late-night meetings for years. But that wasn't the worst part. Claire Mensah had a son, 7 years old, born at St. Emmanuel Hospital, the same week, the same maternity ward. The investigator slid the boy's photograph across the table. Sandra's breath stopped. The child looked nothing like Daniel. His school uniform was worn thin, his shoes were too small, and on his cheek was a fading bruise. Sandra stared at the boy's face, the shape of the nose, her father's forehead, her grandmother's ears. This was her son, her real son, living a hard life across town, while another child slept safely in her house. Sandra closed the file slowly. "I need you to find out something else," she told the investigator. "What happened in that hospital 7 years ago?" 2 days later, the investigator called again. "There's something you need to know," she said. "The hospital records from that week were altered." Sandra went still. "And the person who authorized those changes—" The investigator hesitated. "Was Richard Okafor." Sandra slowly lowered the phone, because if Richard had signed those records, then this had never been a mistake. It had been planned, and the man responsible was sleeping in her bed every night. But what Sandra did next, no one could have predicted. If you want to know what happens next, go to this channel and watch part 2, because the truth about that hospital night is far worse than anyone imagined.